Tonight, the President of the United States looked straight into a camera and said a whole civilization could die before sunrise. Not a metaphor, not a slip of the tongue, a direct on-camera warning aimed at one country, Iran. And a few hours after he said it, explosions were already being reported across Tehran. If that sentence didn't stop your scroll, nothing will. Stay with me, because I'm about to walk you through exactly what Trump actually said, what happened right after he said it, why Iran's own government appears to be reacting like it genuinely did not see this coming, and where every single piece of this is actually heading next. Hit like right now if you want more people to actually understand this, instead of just seeing a 10-second clip out of context. Subscribe, because the pattern you're about to see repeating night after night is not slowing down, it's speeding up. Let's get into it. Here's the phrase that's been circulating everywhere the last few months, and it's worth hearing in full, because the clipped version doesn't do it justice. Trump warned that a whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again, unless Iran agreed to a deal on the spot. He said it in front of military officials, not in some late-night social media post. He said it with the kind of flat, deliberate delivery that made even veteran reporters in the room go quiet. Now, here's what almost nobody explains properly when they cover this line. This wasn't the first time. It wasn't even close to the last. Trump has now told Iran some version of, "We're going to hit them hard tonight," so many separate times over the last several months that reporters covering the war have started keeping a running list. We're going to hit them very hard tonight, and we're going to hit them hard tomorrow. We hit them very hard again tonight. I'll give them a little warning. We're going to hit them hard tonight, but we'll see how it all works out. That last one is genuinely chilling once you slow down and actually read it. A sitting American president standing next to a foreign leader at a NATO summit, casually telling reporters he's about to bomb another country that same evening, and then adding, almost as an afterthought, that he'll give them a little warning first. Not a formal diplomatic channel, not a UN notification, a warning delivered basically as a press quote thrown out between questions about something else entirely. So when you hear that Iran's government appears to be in shock tonight, understand what you're actually watching. You're not watching a country blindsided by something totally unprecedented. You're watching a country that has now absorbed this exact warning, this exact phrase repeated over and over, and is still somehow struggling to get ahead of it every single time it actually happens. That gap between how predictable this pattern has become and how unprepared Tehran still looks every time it lands is the real story we're going to unpack today. Let's rewind properly, because the road that got us here matters enormously for understanding why tonight feels different, even though the words sound almost identical to what came before. Back in February, Trump gave Iran a 10 to 15-day deadline to strike a deal over its nuclear program or face consequences. He said negotiations were going well, while simultaneously demanding Tehran reach what he called a meaningful agreement. Iran responded by threatening to retaliate against American bases across the region if it was struck first. That was the temperature of the relationship in the weeks before everything changed. Then, on February 28th, the United States and Israel carried out a coordinated strike that killed Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, along with several senior officials standing beside him. Think about the scale of that for a second. This is a man who had sat at the absolute top of Iran's entire political, military, and religious structure for nearly 4 decades. He wasn't just a head of state. In Iran's system, the supreme leader is the final word on almost everything: foreign policy, the military, the courts. Removing him wasn't like removing a president in a normal democracy, where a clear line of succession exists and the country simply continues the next morning. It was ripping the center of gravity out of an entire nation's government in a single strike. Iran's response was immediate and enormous. It shut down the Strait of Hormuz entirely, the narrow waterway between Iran and Oman that roughly a fifth of the entire planet's daily oil supply passes through. Oil prices didn't just tick upward, they exploded past $120 a barrel within days. Fuel shortages were reported as far away as Vietnam. That single decision turned a regional assassination into a global economic emergency within 72 hours. By late March, Trump had shifted from vague deadlines to specific, dramatic ultimatums. He gave Iran 48 hours to reopen the strait or face what he called severe consequences. He pushed that deadline back once, at Iran's own request, even while Tehran was publicly dismissing his proposed deal as one-sided and unfair. Then came April 7th, and the "civilization will die tonight" warning, delivered less than 2 hours before his own deadline expired. And here's the twist that a lot of coverage completely glosses over. Within that same single day, Trump went from threatening Iran's total annihilation to agreeing to a 2-week ceasefire. Intermediaries led by Pakistan worked frantically behind the scenes to pull that off. Even China, Iran's largest trading partner, and in almost every other context, one of America's most significant economic competitors, reportedly pulled strings quietly to help push both sides toward a pause. Trump's own defense secretary told reporters the U.S. military had done its part, at least for now. And Trump himself said the United States would work with Iran to dig up its enriched uranium stockpile, though Iran never actually confirmed agreeing to that. That whiplash from apocalyptic threat to negotiated ceasefire in a matter of hours tells you something important about how this entire pattern actually works. And it's about to repeat itself in front of you, because we are nowhere near done with the timeline yet. Fast forward to June. A memorandum of understanding gets signed, a real, formal, on-paper roadmap meant to end this war within 60 days. For about 3 weeks, it actually holds. Ships start moving normally again. Oil begins flowing at something close to a regular pace. Saudi Arabia alone reportedly ships more than 34 million barrels of crude through the strait during that short window, more than double what it managed in the 3 months before the ceasefire. For a moment, the entire region genuinely exhales. Then in late June, an Iranian drone slams into a cargo ship moving through the strait. No casualties, not much physical damage, but it cracks the entire foundation. Within days, Iran has struck 3 more commercial vessels for allegedly ignoring routes it claims the right to control and monitor. And that's exactly when Trump's tonight warnings come roaring back, louder and more frequent than before. Early July, Trump declares the ceasefire over after Iran strikes ships and the U.S. retaliates. Iran responds by hitting American military sites in Kuwait and Bahrain, a second consecutive day of direct exchanges. In the middle of all this, Trump calls Iran's negotiators cuckoo, describing a pattern where they'd sit in a room, seemingly agree to everything, and then walk out and hold a news conference claiming they'd never discussed any of it. It's a strange, almost personal frustration, coming from the same man who just days earlier was threatening the end of a civilization. Mid-July, in an interview with radio host Hugh Hewitt, Trump says plainly, "We're going to hit them very hard tonight, and we're going to hit them hard tomorrow." When Hewitt asks whether the U.S. knows where Iran's remaining military leadership is hiding, Trump doesn't deny it. He says, "Yeah, I do, but we don't want to talk about that. But we certainly are watching." Read that back slowly. The President of the United States just confirmed, on the record, in a public radio interview, that Washington believes it knows the location of what's left of Iran's senior military command, and chose to say so publicly instead of quietly. That's not a slip. That's a message aimed directly at the people making decisions inside Tehran tonight, telling them there is nowhere left that feels fully safe. Days later, Trump escalates again, this time targeting infrastructure specifically rather than military assets. Knock out all their power plants. We're going to knock out all their bridges unless they get to the table and negotiate. Iran's military headquarters responds almost immediately, warning that if the U.S. follows through, all infrastructure in the region will be crushed under the steel blows of Iran's armed forces. The European Union's own aviation safety agency gets nervous enough to formally warn airlines against flying through parts of Persian Gulf airspace, a genuinely rare step that signals how seriously outside institutions are now taking the possibility of this spreading further. Even in the middle of all this, the diplomatic track never fully goes dark. On July 12th, Pakistan's foreign minister gets on a call with his Iranian counterpart, and both sides explicitly agree to, quote, maintain close communication through diplomatic channels. Threats of infrastructure obliteration and quiet diplomatic phone calls happening in the exact same 48-hour window. That tells you this entire relationship is being run on two completely separate tracks simultaneously. One designed to intimidate, one designed to keep an actual door open. And both are running at full speed at the same time. And now here we are. This week alone, the United States has carried out its 9th consecutive night of strikes against Iran. 9 consecutive nights. Trump told reporters Iran has been, in his words, very, very badly damaged, and that they've lost everything almost militarily, adding that the U.S. hit them very hard again tonight. Hours later, Iranian state media reports a fresh wave of missiles launched from Loristan province toward what it vaguely calls enemy targets. No further details are given. And if you've been paying attention to how Iran communicates during this war, that kind of vagueness usually means one of two things. Either the strike genuinely didn't go the way Tehran wanted, or officials are being deliberately careful to avoid confirming exactly how limited their remaining capability actually is. So why does Iran's government look like it's in shock right now, after 9 straight nights of a pattern it has now lived through for months? Here's where it gets genuinely interesting, and this is the part almost nobody connects together properly. Iran's leadership right now is not one unified decision-making body anymore. After Khamenei was killed back in February, an interim council briefly held power before his son was installed as the new supreme leader, reportedly wounded in the very same strike that killed his father. Multiple sources tracking internal Iranian government deliberations describe his actual role as largely ceremonial, legitimizing decisions that are genuinely being made elsewhere rather than truly directing policy himself. Real operational authority appears concentrated around senior Revolutionary Guard commanders and a tight, hardline circle inside Iran's National Security Council. Iran's foreign minister handles most of the outward diplomatic messaging, while the parliamentary speaker, himself a former Guard commander, increasingly functions as the connective tissue, holding together what's left of a genuinely fractured chain of command. A government splintered across that many separate centers of power simply cannot coordinate a response at the same speed a unified government could. Every single time Trump drops one of these tonight warnings, multiple factions inside Tehran have to independently process it, argue internally about how to respond, and try to project a unified public face, all before the sun comes up. That's not weakness born of surprise. That's the structural cost of losing your top leadership in a single morning and never fully rebuilding a clear chain of command since. Layer onto that the fact that Iran is simultaneously managing a domestic crisis it can't fully separate from the war. Human rights monitoring groups tracking the situation from both inside and outside the country believe the regime has increased its use of executions under the cover of the conflict, a pattern that tends to intensify whenever a government's external legitimacy and internal control are both under pressure at the same time. When Khamenei's funeral was finally held in Tehran earlier this month, months after his actual death, some Iranians who had lost family members in earlier government crackdowns described feeling no comfort at all watching the ceremony. A government trying to manage grief, internal dissent, a fractured leadership structure, and 9 consecutive nights of American airstrikes all at once is not a government operating with any real margin for error. There's also something worth noticing about Trump's own language pattern here, because it isn't random, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. Watch how often he pairs a maximalist threat with an immediate offer of a way out, almost in the same breath. A whole civilization will die tonight was delivered less than 2 hours before his own deadline, meaning there was still a built-in window inside the threat itself. We're going to hit them hard tonight, but we'll see how it all works out. Leaves the door open in the very same sentence as the warning. Even the power plants and bridges threat ends with, unless they get to the table and negotiate. Every single one of these warnings, as dramatic as they sound in a headline, comes with an exit built directly into the wording. That's not a coincidence, and it's not indecision either. It's a specific negotiating style, pressure and an off-ramp delivered together every single time. Whether that style actually works long-term is a genuinely open question right now, and it connects to something bigger sitting underneath all of this. Trump has suggested more than once that the United States would ultimately end up controlling the Strait of Hormuz outright, telling reporters plainly, "I think in the end we will end up just controlling the whole thing." And separately floating the idea of charging a 20% toll on any ship wanting safe passage through it, paid for by, in his words, the countries the U.S. is helping in this conflict. That's not the language of someone looking for a quick handshake deal anymore. That's the language of someone who has, at least rhetorically, moved the goalposts from simply ending the war to permanently redrawing who actually controls one of the most strategically important waterways on the entire planet. And underneath even that sits the single biggest unresolved question in this entire war. The fortified nuclear facility believed to sit beneath a mountain near Natanz, a site many analysts currently believe sits below the reach of even the most powerful bunker-buster weapons in the American arsenal right now. Earlier strikes on Iran's known nuclear sites reportedly only set the program back by months, not years, largely because Iran appears to have relocated much of its enriched uranium before those strikes ever landed. Trump has said repeatedly that the United States will eventually deal with that site one way or another. If any future tonight warning ends up attached to that specific target instead of coastal military assets or shipping lanes, that would represent the single largest escalation of this entire war. And many analysts believe it's exactly the kind of moment that would pull Israel back into full, direct, open military involvement at a scale beyond anything seen so far. So here's where that leaves Iran's government tonight, and why the shock you're seeing is real, even after months of near-identical warnings. Every previous tonight threat eventually gave way to some form of pause, a ceasefire, a memorandum, a diplomatic phone call. Each time, Iran's fractured leadership could tell itself the pattern would hold. Intense pressure, followed by an off-ramp, followed by a pause to regroup and rebuild. What's genuinely different about tonight is the number 9. 9 consecutive nights with no pause in between. No memorandum currently holding. No ceasefire on the table. Just a straight, uninterrupted line of strikes. Each one preceded by the exact same kind of warning that used to be reliably followed by a breather. And this time, that breather simply hasn't come. That's the actual story underneath the headline. It's not really about one dramatic sentence from a podium. It's about a country's entire decision-making apparatus, already fractured since February, trying to process the fact that the pattern it had learned to survive might have just stopped applying in real time, with no script left to fall back on. Where does this go from here? Nobody currently involved is showing real signs of being the side willing to blink first. Trump keeps pairing threats with exits, but the exits are visibly getting narrower each time this cycle repeats. Iran keeps issuing counter warnings about crushing regional infrastructure under steel blows. But its actual capacity to follow through has been visibly degraded by months of continuous strikes on its coastal defenses, radar systems, and military assets. Mediators in Islamabad and Doha are still working the phones, and that thread genuinely hasn't broken yet. But it's being stretched thinner with every consecutive night this continues without a pause. What happens the next time Trump says the word tonight is genuinely the single most important open question in this entire war right now. Because for months, that word came with a built-in exit hiding inside it somewhere. Right now, for the first time since this pattern started back in April, it isn't entirely clear that it still does. If you made it this far, you now understand something that 10-second clips of "civilization will die tonight" completely strip away. The pattern behind the words, why it worked for months, why Iran's fractured leadership keeps getting caught flat-footed by a threat it has technically heard before, and why tonight might be the exact moment that pattern finally stops working the way it used to. Drop a single word in the comments. Does Iran fold, or does this war go all the way to that mountain everyone's been avoiding talking about? I read every single one of these, and I genuinely want to know what you think happens before the next video goes up. If this actually helped you see past the headline, hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because at the rate this is escalating, the next tonight warning could come before you even finish reading this sentence.